On October 14, 2017, 16-year-old Madison Parker told her parents she was going to the mall with friends in Naperville, Illinois. Instead, she drove to a Starbucks 20 minutes away to meet someone she'd been talking to online for 3 weeks. Security cameras at the Starbucks captured Madison arriving, sitting alone at a corner table, checking her phone nervously. At 4:02 p.m., a person walked in and sat across from her. They talked for 18 minutes. At 4:20 p.m., Madison stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out with this person. The parking lot camera showed them getting into a dark blue sedan. Madison got in the passenger seat willingly, smiling. The car drove away. Madison Parker was never seen again. For 5 years, that security footage was all investigators had. The last images of a 16-year-old girl wearing her favorite denim jacket, getting into a car with someone she'd met online. Then in March 2022, a deleted Instagram account, a storage unit rental receipt, and a hiker's discovery in the woods outside Chicago finally revealed what happened to Madison Parker. If you're drawn to real cases and want to join a community that genuinely cares about these stories and searches for the truth, make sure to subscribe and like this video. We don't forget these people. New cases every day. Now, let's begin. Madison Elizabeth Parker was born in May 2001 in Naperville, Illinois, a suburb about 30 miles west of Chicago. She was the oldest of 3 children born to David and Sarah Parker. Her younger siblings were twins, Emma and Ethan, who were 13 when Madison disappeared. The Parker family lived in a 4-bedroom house in a safe, middle-class neighborhood where kids rode bikes to school and parents knew their neighbors. David worked as an accountant for a firm in downtown Chicago, commuting by train most days. Sarah was a part-time nurse at a local clinic, working 3 days a week so she could be home when the kids got out of school. Madison was a junior at Naperville Central High School in fall 2017, a good student with mostly A's and B's, involved in yearbook committee and volleyball, though she'd quit the team after sophomore year saying it took too much time. She had a close group of friends, girls she'd known since middle school. The kind of friendships teenage girls have where they text constantly, share everything, finish each other's sentences. Her best friend was a girl named Ashley Morrison, who'd been her friend since 6th grade. They'd done everything together, sleepovers every weekend, shared clothes, planned to go to the same college, had elaborate inside jokes nobody else understood. Ashley would later say that Madison had been acting differently in the weeks before she disappeared, more secretive, spending more time on her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't explain. Madison had gotten her driver's license in June 2017, 4 months before she disappeared. She drove a 2012 Honda Civic that had been her grandmother's car before her grandmother died. Sarah and David had given it to Madison for her 16th birthday, with the understanding that she'd pay for her own gas by working part-time. She'd gotten a job at a local frozen yogurt shop in July, worked weekends and some weekday evenings, was responsible about her shifts. The job gave her money and freedom. She could go places without asking her parents for rides, could buy things without asking for money, had independence that came with being 16 and having a car and a job. She was active on social media like most teenagers in 2017. Instagram was her main platform. She had about 600 followers, mostly kids from school and some family members. She posted selfies, photos with friends, pictures of her cat named Oliver, the usual teenage girl Instagram content. Her last post was from October 12, 2017, 2 days before she disappeared. A photo of her and Ashley making silly faces with the caption, "Besties forever." Madison wasn't dating anyone seriously in fall 2017. She'd had a boyfriend sophomore year, a boy named Tyler who played on the soccer team, but they'd broken up over the summer and stayed friends. She'd been on a few dates with different boys from school, but nothing serious. Her parents thought she was focused on school and friends and work, wasn't particularly interested in dating. What they didn't know was that Madison had been talking to someone online. Someone who wasn't from school. Someone her parents had never met. Someone who would eventually destroy her. October 14th, 2017 was a Saturday. Madison had worked at the frozen yogurt shop Friday night, gotten home around 9:30 p.m., spent Saturday morning sleeping in and then hanging out at home. Around 2 p.m., she told Sarah she was going to the mall with Ashley and some other girls from school. Sarah didn't question it. Madison went to the mall with friends all the time. It was what teenage girls did on Saturday afternoons. Wandered the mall, tried on clothes they couldn't afford, got food court Chinese food, took selfies in dressing rooms. Normal, safe, teenage activity. Madison left the house at 2:15 p.m., told her mom she'd be home by 6 p.m. for dinner. Sarah watched her walk to her car, back out of the driveway, drive away down their suburban street. It was the last time Sarah would see her daughter. But Madison didn't go to them. She drove in the opposite direction, toward a Starbucks in a different suburb 20 minutes away, to meet someone she'd been messaging with on Instagram for the past 3 weeks. Ashley Morrison had no idea Madison was telling people she was going to the mall with her. When Sarah called Ashley's house at 7 p.m., asking if the girls were still shopping because Madison hadn't come home for dinner, Ashley was confused. She hadn't seen Madison. They hadn't made plans to go to the mall. She didn't know what Sarah was talking about. That's when Sarah realized Madison had lied about where she was going. When Madison didn't come home Saturday evening and wasn't answering her phone. When Ashley confirmed she hadn't been with Madison. When it became clear Madison had lied about where she was going, Sarah and David called the Naperville Police Department. Officers responded to the Parker house around 8:30 p.m. They took a missing person report, got a description of Madison and her car, asked the standard questions about whether Madison might have run away, or whether there were problems at home that would make her want to leave. Sarah and David insisted Madison was happy, wasn't in trouble, had no reason to run away, but they also had to admit they didn't know where she'd actually gone that. She'd lied about going to the mall. Where had she really been? The first break came from Madison's phone. Police were able to ping her phone location and found it had last been active around 4:30 p.m. near a Starbucks in a suburb called Woodridge, about 20 minutes from the Parkers' home. After 4:30 p.m., the phone went offline, either powered off or the battery died. Police went to the Starbucks Sunday morning, October 15th. The manager pulled security footage from Saturday afternoon. That's when investigators saw Madison for the first time since she'd left home. The footage showed Madison's Honda Civic pulling into the parking lot at 3:47 p.m. Madison got out, locked her car, walked into the Starbucks. She was wearing jeans, a denim jacket, white sneakers, her blonde hair in a ponytail. She looked like any teenage girl going to meet friends for coffee. She ordered something at the counter. The footage showed her talking to the barista, paying, waiting for her drink. Then she took her cup and sat at a corner table near the window. She pulled out her phone, looked at it, put it down, looked around nervously. At 4:02 p.m., someone walked into the Starbucks. The person wore a dark hoodie, jeans, sneakers, a baseball cap pulled low. The footage quality wasn't good enough to clearly see facial. The person walked directly to Madison's table and sat down across from her. Madison smiled. Not a frightened smile, not a forced smile. A genuine, excited smile. She knew this person. She'd been waiting for them. They talked for 18 minutes. The footage showed them sitting across from each other, Madison gesturing with her hands, smiling, the other person leaning forward, both of them seeming comfortable and engaged. It looked like two people on a friendly coffee date. At 4:20 p.m., Madison stood up, grabbed her purse, threw away her coffee cup. The other person stood too. They walked out of the Starbucks together. The parking lot camera, grainier than the interior cameras, showed them walking to a dark blue sedan parked on the far side of the lot. Madison got into the passenger seat willingly, no force, no hesitation. The person got into the driver's seat. The car backed out and drove away. That was the last time anyone saw Madison Parker. Police immediately started trying to identify who Madison had met at the Starbucks. They reviewed the security footage dozens of times, trying to get a clear look at the person's face. The hoodie and baseball cap obscured most of their features. They couldn't determine gender with certainty from the footage. They couldn't identify the person. The car was a dark blue sedan, possibly a Honda or Toyota based on the shape, but the license plate wasn't visible in the footage. Detectives canvassed the area around the Starbucks, talked to other businesses, looked for additional camera angles that might have caught the car or the license plate. Nothing useful was found. Sarah gave police permission to access Madison's Instagram account. That's where investigators found what they were looking for: evidence of who Madison had been talking to. Madison's Instagram DMs showed conversations with an account under the username AlexChicago23. The account had been created in September 2017, just a month before Madison disappeared. It had a profile photo of a generic sunset, no personal photos. The account followed about 200 people, mostly teenagers in the Chicago suburbs, and had maybe 50 followers. The messages between Madison and AlexChicago23 had started on September 23rd, 3 weeks before Madison disappeared. Alex had sent Madison a message complimenting one of her Instagram photos. Madison had responded. They'd started talking. The messages were flirty but not overtly inappropriate. Alex said they were 18, a senior at a high school in a different suburb, into photography and music. They talked about bands they liked, movies, school, normal teenage conversation topics. Alex had sent Madison a few photos, selfies that showed someone who looked like a teenage boy, brown hair, casual clothes, nothing that seemed threatening. Investigators would later determine those photos had been stolen from someone else's social media account, a real teenage boy who had no connection to this case and no idea his photos had been used. Alex and Madison had messaged daily for 3 weeks. The conversations had become more personal over time. Alex had told Madison they felt like they could really talk to her, that she understood them in ways other people didn't. Classic grooming language that makes teenagers feel special and chosen. On October 13th, the day before Madison disappeared, Alex had messaged, "Want to meet up tomorrow? We could get coffee. I really want to finally meet you in person." Madison had responded, "Yes, where?" They'd arranged to meet at the Starbucks in Woodridge at 4 p.m. on October 14th. Madison had been told by Alex not to tell her parents because they won't understand. They'll say I'm too old for you. But age doesn't matter when you have a real connection. Red flags that Madison, 16 and excited about meeting someone who made her feel special, hadn't recognized as dangerous. The last message from Alex to Madison had been sent at 3:52 p.m. on October 14th. "I'm here. Can't wait to see you." After that, no more messages. The account went silent. Police tried to trace the Alex Chicago 23 Instagram account. It had been created using a fake email address that had been set up specifically for creating the account. The account had been accessed from various IP addresses across the Chicago area, suggesting the person had been using public Wi-Fi at different locations to avoid being traced. Instagram cooperated with the investigation, provided what data they had on the account, but it led nowhere. The person behind Alex's Chicago 23 had been careful to hide their identity. Detectives interviewed Madison's friends to see if she'd mentioned Alex to anyone. Ashley said Madison had mentioned talking to someone online a couple weeks before she disappeared, had seemed excited about it, but hadn't given details. Madison had said she might go meet them but hadn't said when or where. Other friends gave similar accounts. Madison had been slightly secretive in recent weeks, had seemed distracted, had been on her phone more than usual, but no one had specifics about who she was talking to or planning to meet. Madison's car was found on October 16th, 2 days after she disappeared, in the parking lot of a shopping center about 5 miles from the Starbucks where she'd met Alex. The car was locked, appeared undisturbed. Madison's purse was gone. Presumably she'd taken it with her when she got into the blue sedan. The discovery of Madison's car meant that she'd definitely left the Starbucks in someone else's vehicle and hadn't returned to her own car. This wasn't a case of Madison driving somewhere and something happening. She'd deliberately gotten into a car with someone and driven away. An Amber Alert was issued. Madison's photo was distributed across Illinois and surrounding states. The grainy security footage of the person in the hoodie at Starbucks was released to media, though investigators knew it was too unclear to help much with identification. The story made local and then national news. "Teenage girl meets someone from Instagram, vanishes," was the kind of headline that terrified parents and went viral on social media. Madison's case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of social media, of meeting strangers online, of teenage girls thinking they know better than their parents' warnings. But knowing what happened generally didn't help find Madison specifically. As October turned to November and November to December, the case went cold. The first year after Madison disappeared was the worst for the Parker family. The acute panic of those initial days never fully faded, but it evolved into a chronic dread, a constant background awareness that their daughter was missing, and they had no idea if she was alive or dead. Sarah quit her nursing job to focus entirely on finding Madison. She created a Facebook page called Find Madison Parker that grew to over 50,000 followers. She posted updates on the investigation, shared Madison's photo, organized searches, coordinated with other families of missing children. David continued working because someone had to pay the bills, but his coworkers said he was a shell of his former self. He aged visibly in the months after Madison disappeared, his hair going gray, his face gaunt from stress and poor sleep. The twins, Emma and Ethan, were 13 when their sister disappeared. They struggled in school, both developed anxiety, both required therapy to process the trauma of having their sister vanish. Their adolescence was shaped by Madison's absence, by living in a house haunted by grief. Madison's case remained active with Naperville police, but as months passed with no new leads, the investigation slowed. Detective James Morrison, who'd been assigned as lead investigator, continued working the case, but admitted privately to Sarah that without new evidence, there was little he could do. The security footage from Starbucks had been analyzed by FBI experts, but they couldn't get a clear enough image to identify the person Madison had met. The Alex Chicago 23 Instagram account had been thoroughly investigated. Instagram had cooperated fully. Forensic digital experts had analyzed the account, but whoever created it had been careful not to leave traceable information. The dark blue sedan had never been identified. Police had reviewed footage from traffic cameras near the Starbucks, looking for dark blue sedans in the area around 4:20 p.m. on October 14th. But there were dozens. Without a license plate, they couldn't narrow it down. Investigators had interviewed sex offenders in the Chicago area, looked at people with histories of crimes against children, followed up on hundreds of tips from people claiming to have seen Madison or to know something about her disappearance. Nothing had led anywhere. By 2019, 2 years after Madison disappeared, the case was effectively cold. Detective Morrison kept the file open, followed up on occasional tips, but told the Parker family honestly that without significant new evidence, finding Madison would require either a confession or a lucky break. Sarah refused to accept that Madison might never be found. She maintained the Facebook page, did media interviews on anniversaries of Madison's disappearance, partnered with organizations focused on missing children and internet safety. She spoke at schools about the dangers of social media, about how predators use fake accounts to groom teenagers, about how Madison's case proved that smart, good kids can still be deceived by people who know how to manipulate. Madison's story was used in educational materials about internet safety. The Starbucks security footage, pixelated, haunting images of a blonde ponytailed girl getting into a stranger's car, was shown in school assemblies across the country as a warning of what can happen when teenagers meet people from online. But educational value didn't bring Madison home. David told Sarah multiple times that they needed to accept that Madison was probably dead, that hoping for her to come home was torture, that they needed to find a way to move forward. Sarah refused. Some mothers can't let go of hope even when hope is painful. The Parker house became a shrine to Madison. Her bedroom was kept exactly as she'd left it. Her clothes still hung in her closet. Her yearbook photos were on every wall. Christmas was agony every year. The stocking hung for Madison, who wouldn't be there to open presents, the empty chair at the dinner table, the family photos with a person missing. Emma and Ethan grew up in this environment of unresolved grief. By 2022, they were 18, preparing to graduate high school and go to college. They'd spent their entire adolescence as the twins whose sister disappeared. It had defined them in ways they resented but couldn't escape. Ashley Morrison, Madison's best friend, had graduated high school in 2019 and gone to University of Illinois. She still thought about Madison constantly, still felt guilty that she hadn't known Madison was planning to meet someone from online, hadn't warned her parents, hadn't somehow prevented what happened. She'd started an Instagram account called Justice for Madison that kept Madison's case in public awareness, posted updates, shared memories, tried to keep pressure on investigators to keep looking. By October 2021, 4 years after Madison disappeared, the case seemed destined to remain unsolved. There had been no credible sightings, no new evidence, no breaks in the investigation. Detective Morrison was nearing retirement and worried that when he left, Madison's case would be filed away and forgotten. Then, in March 2022, something happened that would finally crack the case wide open. Not through brilliant detective work or advanced technology, but through a random hiker and a storage unit that was 3 months overdue on rent. On March 12, 2022, a woman named Patricia Reynolds was hiking on a trail in the Waterfall Glen Forest Preserve, a nature area about 15 miles from where Madison had disappeared in Naperville. Patricia hiked this trail regularly, knew it well, liked to get out in nature on Saturday mornings before the trail got crowded. That Saturday, Patricia noticed something off the trail about 20 yards into the woods. A piece of blue fabric caught on a branch. From a distance, it looked like someone had littered, maybe thrown away a backpack or jacket. Patricia, annoyed by people who littered on hiking trails, walked into the woods to pick it up and throw it away properly. As she got closer, Patricia realized it wasn't trash. It was a denim jacket, weathered and faded from years of exposure to elements, but still recognizably a jacket. And underneath the jacket, barely visible through overgrown vegetation, was something that made Patricia's blood run cold. A human skull. Patricia immediately called 911. DuPage County Sheriff's deputies and forensic teams responded to the scene. What Patricia had found was human remains. Skeletal remains that had been in the woods for years based on the level of decomposition and the way vegetation had grown around and over the bones. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to the medical examiner's office. The denim jacket found near the remains was bagged as evidence. A search of the surrounding area found additional items: a purse with a wallet inside, a phone that was water-damaged and non-functional, shoes, other pieces of clothing. The wallet contained an ID, Madison Parker's ID. Dental records confirmed what the ID suggested. The remains were Madison Parker. She'd been dead for years, likely had died soon after she disappeared in October 2017. Her body had been in those woods the entire time her family had been searching, less than a half-hour drive from her home. The medical examiner determined cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Madison had been killed, had not died accidentally. This was a homicide. The news was devastating to the Parker family. Sarah had spent 4.5 years hoping Madison was alive somewhere, maybe being held captive, maybe with amnesia, maybe somehow able to come home. Learning Madison had been dead since 2017, had been in the woods while Sarah had been posting Find Madison updates, was unbearable. But at least they knew. After 4.5 years of not knowing, they finally had an answer about what happened to their daughter. The discovery of Madison's body reinvigorated the investigation. Detective Morrison, who'd been planning to retire, delayed his retirement to work on solving Madison's murder. FBI agents who'd worked the original case came back. The case was front-page news again. Forensic teams examined every piece of evidence found with Madison's remains. The phone was too damaged to recover data, but the purse and jacket were analyzed carefully. DNA testing was done on the remains and on items found nearby, looking for any DNA evidence from whoever had killed Madison. They found something. A hair that wasn't Madison's, stuck to her jacket. Male DNA based on analysis. They ran it through CODIS, the national DNA database, hoping for a match. No match. Whoever killed Madison wasn't in the criminal DNA database, either because they'd never been arrested or because they'd committed their crimes before DNA collection became standard. But the DNA profile was saved. If they could identify a suspect, they could compare their DNA to the profile and potentially prove they'd been with Madison. The break in the case came from somewhere completely unexpected. A storage unit facility in a suburb called Downers Grove, about 8 miles from where Madison's body was found. The facility had contacted DuPage County Sheriff's Office in March 2022 about a storage unit that was 3 months overdue on rent. The owner of the unit hadn't responded to multiple attempts at contact. Per the rental agreement, if rent went unpaid for 3 months, the facility could open the unit and sell the contents to recover unpaid fees. When the facility manager opened Unit 247, he found it filled with disturbing items: computers, hard drives, cameras, photos printed and in digital storage. Materials that suggested this unit belonged to someone with an interest in content involving minors. The manager immediately called police rather than clearing out the unit. DuPage County Sheriff's deputies responded, secured the unit, got a warrant to search it thoroughly. What they found was horrifying. Evidence of years of online predation, fake social media accounts, hard drives containing thousands of photos, evidence of grooming and exploitation of multiple teenagers over at least a decade. And among the digital files, they found screenshots of Instagram conversations between someone and Madison Parker. The storage unit's renter had been Alex Chicago 23. The storage unit was rented under the name David M. Harrington, with an address in Downers Grove, Illinois. The rental agreement had a credit card number and driver's license information on file. Police ran David Harrington's name. He was 43 years old in 2022, worked as an IT specialist for a tech company in the western suburbs. He had no criminal record. He'd lived in Illinois his whole life, had graduated from a local college, had held steady employment for 20 years. On paper, he was a completely normal, unremarkable middle-aged man. But the contents of his storage unit told a different story. On March 15, 2022, DuPage County Sheriff's deputies and FBI agents executed a search warrant at David Harrington's house, a small 2-bedroom ranch in Downers Grove. Harrington was home when officers arrived, was immediately taken into custody. The search of Harrington's house found more evidence: computers, More hard drives, camera equipment, burner phones. His home office looked like a surveillance operation, with multiple monitors and storage devices. Forensic analysis would later show that Harrington had been running dozens of fake social media accounts over the years, had been contacting and grooming teenage girls across the Chicago area and beyond. The Instagram account, AlexChicago23, that had been used to contact Madison was just one of many fake accounts Harrington had created. He'd used stolen photos of real teenagers to make the accounts look legitimate, had carefully crafted personas designed to appeal to teenage girls, had spent years perfecting his techniques for gaining trust and arranging meetings. Digital forensics found evidence that Harrington had met with multiple girls over the years before Madison. Some of those meetings had been brief encounters that hadn't escalated. Others had been assaults. Madison appeared to be the only one he'd killed, though investigators couldn't rule out the possibility of other victims who hadn't been found. When confronted with the evidence, Harrington initially denied everything. His attorney advised him not to speak to police, but as the evidence mounted, the storage unit contents, the computers from his house, the DNA evidence from Madison's jacket matching his DNA, Harrington's situation became untenable. Forensic analysts determined that Harrington's car, a 2015 Honda Accord, was the same type of dark blue sedan seen in the Starbucks parking lot security footage on October 14, 2017. While the footage wasn't clear enough to positively identify the specific car, it was consistent with Harrington's vehicle. Cell phone tower data, which had been retained from 2017, showed that one of Harrington's phones had pinged off towers near the Starbucks in Woodridge around 4 p.m. on October 14, 2017, exactly when Madison had met Alex there. Financial records showed that Harrington had rented the storage unit in Downers Grove in 2015, had been paying the monthly rent until December 2021, when his payments stopped. Investigators theorized he'd stopped paying because he'd lost his job or had financial problems, had abandoned the unit hoping it would just be cleaned out without anyone looking at the contents carefully. If he'd kept paying the $80 monthly rent for that storage unit, he might never have been caught. On March 22, 2022, David Harrington was formally charged with first-degree murder in the death of Madison Parker, along with dozens of other charges related to exploitation of minors, child sexual abuse material, and other crimes discovered through the investigation of his storage unit and computers. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Harrington's attorney began plea negotiations. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, Harrington agreed to plead guilty and provide details about what happened to Madison. According to Harrington's confession, given in April 2022, he'd created the AlexChicago23 account specifically to target Madison after seeing her Instagram profile and determining she lived in the suburbs. He'd stolen photos from a real teenager's social media to make the account look legitimate. He'd spent 3 weeks messaging with Madison, building trust, making her feel special and understood. He'd arranged to meet her at the Starbucks in Woodridge because it was far enough from Naperville that Madison wouldn't run into anyone she knew, but close enough that she'd agree to drive there. He'd met Madison at Starbucks on October 14, 2017. They'd talked for about 20 minutes. Harrington said Madison had been excited to meet him, had believed he was the 18-year-old boy from his fake profile photos. He'd told Madison he wanted to show her something in his car, claimed he had a camera with photos he'd taken that he wanted to show her, playing into the photography interest he'd mentioned in his messages. Madison had agreed, had walked to his car with him willingly. Once they were in the car, Harrington said things went wrong. He became aggressive. Madison realized she was in danger. She tried to get out of the car. They struggled. He hit her with something. He claimed it was a tire iron he'd had in the car, claimed he'd panicked when she tried to escape, claimed he hadn't planned to hurt her. Madison died from the head injury. Harrington, now with a dead 16-year-old in his car, panicked. He drove to Waterfall Glen Forest Preserve, a place he knew from hiking. He carried Madison's body into the woods, left it there, drove her car to a shopping center and abandoned it, drove home. He said he'd intended to go back and bury Madison properly but never did, was too afraid of being caught if he returned to the scene. So Madison's body had stayed in the woods for 4.5 years, decomposing, being covered by leaves and vegetation, visited only by hikers who walked past 20 yards away without knowing human remains were lying just off the trail. Harrington's confession was self-serving in many ways, claiming panic, claiming Madison's death wasn't premeditated, claiming he hadn't meant to kill her. Prosecutors believed the truth was likely darker, but the confession provided closure for the Parker family about what had happened. On June 15, 2022, David Harrington pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and multiple other charges in exchange for life in prison, without possibility of parole. He'd avoided the death penalty but would die in prison. The resolution of Madison Parker's case in 2022, nearly 5 years after she disappeared, brought complicated emotions for everyone involved. For Sarah and David Parker, learning what happened to Madison was both a relief and a renewed trauma. They finally knew their daughter was dead, that she hadn't suffered for years in captivity, that she'd died relatively quickly. But they also had to process the details of how she died, that she'd been murdered by a predator she'd met online, that she'd walked willingly into danger, that her body had been in the woods for years while they'd been searching. Sarah said in interviews that the guilt she felt was overwhelming. She'd let Madison leave the house that day without knowing where she was. She hadn't monitored Madison's Instagram closely enough to know she was talking to a stranger. She'd raised Madison to be trusting and friendly, hadn't adequately warned her about the dangers of meeting people from online. Friends and therapists told Sarah that none of this was her fault, that Madison was the victim and Harrington was the predator, that no amount of parenting could eliminate all risk. But maternal guilt doesn't respond to logic. Sarah carried that weight, likely would carry it forever. David struggled with anger more than guilt. He was angry at Harrington, obviously, but also angry at Instagram for allowing fake accounts to exist, angry at Madison for lying about where she was going, angry at himself for not protecting his daughter, angry at a world where this kind of thing could happen. The twins, Emma and Ethan, were 18 when Madison's body was found. They'd spent their entire adolescence with an absent sister, with parents consumed by grief, with a house haunted by loss. Learning Madison had been dead the whole time didn't change their day-to-day lives much. Madison had been absent regardless of whether she was alive or dead, but it meant they could finally stop wondering, could finally acknowledge that their sister wasn't coming home. Ashley Morrison, Madison's best friend, was devastated by the news. She'd held on to hope that maybe Madison was alive somewhere. Learning she'd been dead since 2017 was crushing. Ashley had to process that Madison had been lying in the woods while Ashley had been posting Justice for Madison updates, organizing awareness campaigns, keeping Madison's memory alive. It all felt pointless in retrospect, though intellectually, Ashley knew it hadn't been pointless. The public attention had helped keep pressure on investigators. The broader community response was a mix of relief that the case was solved and horror at the details. Parents across the Chicago suburbs and beyond were reminded of the dangers teenagers face online. Madison's case was used again in educational materials, but now with the full story, not just girl meets stranger and disappears, but girl meets stranger and is murdered. Body found years later. The Starbucks where Madison had met Harrington became an unwanted landmark. People came to take photos, to see where Madison had last been seen alive. The store management eventually removed the outdoor seating where Madison had sat, uncomfortable with their location being associated with such a tragedy. The Waterfall Glen Forest Preserve, where Madison's body had been found, installed a memorial bench near the parking area. The plaque read, "In memory of Madison Parker. May your light continue to shine." Hikers left flowers there, small tokens, notes to a girl they'd never met, but whose story had touched them. The Parker family filed a lawsuit against Instagram, owned by Meta, Facebook, arguing that Instagram's failure to adequately verify user identities and prevent fake accounts had enabled Harrington to contact Madison. The lawsuit was complicated and ultimately settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Legal experts noted that social media platforms have significant legal protections against liability for user behavior, making it difficult to hold them accountable even in cases like this. David Harrington was incarcerated at Illinois River Correctional Center, serving life without parole. He was housed in protective custody because inmates who harm children typically face violence from other prisoners. Reports indicated he kept to himself, didn't talk about his crimes, spent his time reading and watching television. He'd live out his remaining years in a small cell, dying of old age in prison if other inmates didn't kill him first. Investigation into Harrington's other victims continued. Police identified multiple girls he'd contacted through fake accounts, some who'd met with him, some who'd been assaulted. Charges for those crimes were still pending. Investigators also worked with national databases to see if Harrington could be connected to other unsolved disappearances of teenage girls in the Midwest, though nothing concrete had been established. The case raised broader questions about online safety for teenagers. How do you protect kids in an era where social media is ubiquitous? How do you teach them to recognize predatory behavior when predators are sophisticated at manipulation? How do you balance allowing teenagers appropriate independence and freedom with keeping them safe from dangers they might not recognize? There were no easy answers. Every parent's instinct was to say, monitor everything your kid does online, but that wasn't realistic or necessarily healthy for teenage development. Every teenager's perspective was, I'm smart enough not to fall for scams. But Madison had been smart too, and she'd still been deceived. Madison's case became a rallying cry for stronger regulations on social media platforms, requiring better identity verification, giving parents more control over teen accounts, creating better reporting systems for predatory behavior. Some changes were implemented, but social media companies pushed back on many proposals, citing privacy concerns and free speech. The fundamental problem remained. Predators exist, teenagers exist online, and bringing those two facts together creates inevitable risk that society still hasn't figured out how to adequately address. As of 2025, nearly 8 years after Madison disappeared, and 3 years after her body was found, the people affected by her case are still processing the trauma and trying to move forward. Sarah Parker is 54 years old now. She hasn't returned to work, instead dedicating herself full-time to advocacy around online safety and missing children. She speaks at schools, works with organizations focused on preventing exploitation of minors online, lobbies for stronger social media regulations. The Find Madison Parker Facebook page was renamed Madison's Light, and now focuses on education rather than searching. Sarah uses the platform to warn other parents about grooming tactics, to teach teenagers to recognize predatory behavior, to advocate for changes that might prevent other families from experiencing what hers did. She says doing this work helps her feel like Madison's death has meaning, like something good can come from something so terrible. But privately, her children and close friends know Sarah is still destroyed by guilt and grief. She's in therapy, takes medication for depression and anxiety, will likely struggle with trauma for the rest of her life. The Parker house was sold in 2023. Sarah and David couldn't stay in the house where Madison had grown up, where her empty bedroom was a constant reminder. They bought a smaller house in a different suburb, started over somewhere without memories of Madison in every room. David retired from accounting in 2023, unable to continue working after years of stress and grief. He and Sarah travel occasionally, trying to rebuild their marriage, which was nearly destroyed by Madison's disappearance. The divorce rate for parents who lose children is high. The shared trauma can drive couples apart, rather than bringing them together. Sarah and David are determined not to become that statistic, but it's hard work. Emma and Ethan Parker are 21 now, juniors in college. Emma attends Northwestern University studying psychology, interested in trauma counseling partly because of her own experience. Ethan is at University of Illinois studying business, wants a career that has nothing to do with tragedy or crime. Both twins have said in interviews that losing Madison shaped their entire adolescence. They missed out on normal teenage experiences because their family was consumed by grief and searching. They had to watch their mother fall apart, had to live with constant uncertainty, had to be the twins whose sister was murdered. Everywhere, they both sought therapy in college to process everything they'd been through. They both have anxiety issues and struggle with trust, but they're also remarkably resilient, determined to build lives that aren't defined by their sister's murder. They visit Madison's grave regularly. She's buried at a cemetery in Naperville, has a headstone with her photo, and the dates 2001, 2017. The family plants flowers there every spring, leaves notes on her birthday, tries to keep her memory alive in healthy ways rather than being consumed by grief. Ashley Morrison is 25 now, graduated from University of Illinois, works as a social media manager for a nonprofit. She shut down the Justice for Madison Instagram account after Madison's body was found and Harrington was arrested. Its purpose had been fulfilled, but she still thinks about Madison constantly, still feels the weight of having lost her best friend to violence. Ashley is involved in advocacy work around online safety, often appearing alongside Sarah at speaking events. She talks about what it was like to be Madison's friend, to watch her be groomed by a predator without recognizing the signs. to live with guilt about not protecting her friend. She says she's hyper-aware now of red flags in online interactions, watches her younger cousins carefully on social media, tries to educate teenagers about manipulation tactics. But she also acknowledges feeling paranoid sometimes, seeing danger in normal situations, struggling to trust people because of what happened to Madison. Detective Morrison retired from Naperville Police in 2023, 5 years after he'd planned to retire. He'd stayed on specifically to see Madison's case through to resolution. He says solving Madison's case, even though it came 5 years too late to save her, was the most important work of his career. He's now a consultant on cold cases, helps other police departments with long unsolved missing persons cases. He says Madison's case taught him that breaks can come from unexpected places: a storage unit with overdue rent, a hiker who noticed something off the trail. You have to keep cases active, keep evidence preserved, keep hoping for that lucky break that makes everything fall into place. The case also influenced how police handle missing persons involving teenagers and social media. Many departments now have dedicated staff who specialize in digital forensics and online They've learned from Madison's case that predators are sophisticated, that fake accounts can be incredibly convincing, that you need specialized skills to investigate these types of crimes. Instagram and other social media platforms made some changes after Madison's case, though critics argue not enough. There are better reporting mechanisms now for concerning behavior, more resources for parents monitoring teen accounts, some improvements to identity verification, though fake accounts still proliferate. The fundamental tension remains. Social media companies want growth and engagement, which comes from easy account creation, while safety advocates want strict verification, which would slow growth and reduce usability. Madison's case added to pressure for reform, but didn't fundamentally change the social media landscape. Waterfall Glen Forest Preserve, where Madison's body was found, remains a popular hiking destination. Most hikers don't know the history, don't know that human remains were found there in 2022. The memorial bench is visited occasionally by people who knew Madison or followed her case, but generally the preserve has returned to being just a nature area where people go to escape the suburbs and enjoy outdoors. The house where David Harrington lived in Downers Grove was sold after his arrest. The new owners reportedly got a good deal because of the house's association with the case. They painted, renovated, tried to remove any reminder of what the previous owner had done. But neighbors remember, and the house is still known locally as the murderer. Harrington is serving his life sentence at Illinois River Correctional Center. He's 50 now, will die in prison. He's been assaulted several times by other inmates who learned what he's in prison for. He spends most of his time in isolation for his own safety. Reports indicate he's never expressed genuine remorse, only said what his attorneys advised him to say during his plea. Psychologists who've evaluated him describe him as having antisocial personality disorder, lacking empathy, seeing his victims as objects rather than people. He's exactly the kind of predator parents fear when they worry about their children online. Madison Parker's case offers crucial lessons about online safety, predatory behavior, and the vulnerabilities teenagers face in the digital. David Harrington was a 40-year-old IT specialist who spent years creating fake social media accounts, stealing photos of real teenagers to make his accounts look legitimate, carefully grooming multiple victims. He was sophisticated, patient, and strategic. This is what modern predators look like. They're not strangers in vans offering candy. They're people who understand technology, social media, and teenage psychology. They know how to make teenagers feel special, understood, and mature. They know how to isolate teens from their parents and friends. They know how to arrange meetings that seem safe. Madison was a smart, good kid from a loving family. She still fell for it because Harrington was good at what he did. The signs of grooming. Looking back at the messages between Harrington, as Alex, and Madison, experts identified classic grooming patterns: excessive compliments and attention, making Madison feel special and unique, creating a sense of shared understanding, gradually introducing more personal topics, suggesting Madison was mature for her age, encouraging secrecy from moving quickly from online to in-person meeting. These are red flags. Teenagers need to recognize and parents need to watch. 4. But they're also tactics that feel flattering and exciting to 16-year-olds who want to feel grown up and special. The importance of communication. Madison lied to her parents about where she was going on October 14, 2017. If she'd been honest, "I'm meeting someone from Instagram." Her parents would have stopped her or insisted on accompanying her. She'd likely still be alive. Why did Madison lie? Because Alex had told her to, had warned her that parents wouldn't understand. Because she knew instinctively that her parents would disapprove. Because at 16, she thought she knew better, thought she could handle it, thought her parents were overprotective. This is the dilemma of parenting teenagers. You want them to talk to you, to be honest with you. But teenagers' natural developmental push for independence and privacy makes them less likely to share things they know parents will object to. Creating an environment where teenagers feel safe being honest, where they're not afraid of punishment for mistakes, where they know parents will listen without immediately saying no, that's crucial, but difficult. Social media platforms create spaces where teenagers and predators can interact with minimal barriers. Fake accounts are easy to create. Identity verification is minimal. Minors' accounts aren't adequately protected. Instagram and other platforms made some changes after Madison's case, but fundamental problems remain. Easy account creation with minimal verification. Difficulty distinguishing fake accounts from real ones. Direct messaging that allows contact between strangers, weak enforcement of age restrictions, algorithms that prioritize engagement over safety. These platforms make billions of dollars, but resist meaningful safety regulations, citing technical challenges and free speech concerns. Cases like Madison's put pressure on them to do better, but progress is slow. Experts offer these recommendations for parents of teenagers. Talk openly about online safety and predatory tactics without being preachy or creating panic-monitor teenagers' social media accounts. Not by spying, but by being connected as a follower and occasionally checking in. Know who your teenagers are talking to online, especially if they mention meeting someone in person. Watch for behavioral changes. Secrecy. Being protective of phones. Mentioning new online friends. Create family rules. About meeting people from online. Requiring parental presence, meeting only in very public places, having friends along. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong about someone your teen is talking to, investigate. Emphasize that you're not trying to control them but to keep them safe, that predators exist and are sophisticated. These steps won't eliminate all risk. Determined teenagers can find ways around parental monitoring, but they reduce risk and increase the chance of catching problems before they escalate. For teenage girls especially, the demographic most targeted by online predators, crucial knowledge includes: people online are not always who they claim to be. Photos can be stolen. Ages can be lied about. Entire personas can be fake. Someone asking you to keep your relationship secret from parents is a red flag. Moving quickly from online to in-person meeting is a red flag. Someone making you feel extremely special and mature right away is likely manipulating. Meeting strangers from online is dangerous even in public places. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Tell a trusted adult if someone online makes you uncomfortable. The hard truth is that teenagers often think they're smart enough to avoid these dangers, that they can recognize predators, that bad things happen to other people but not to them. Madison likely thought the same. Madison's case represents a failure at multiple levels. Social media platforms that prioritize growth over safety law enforcement, that struggles to keep up with digital crimes. Educational systems that don't adequately teach digital literacy and safety. A culture that treats online interactions as somehow separate from real danger. Parents who don't know how to navigate technology their kids are using. We've created a digital world where teenagers spend hours daily, where they form relationships and identities, where they're exposed to both opportunities and dangers. But we haven't created adequate systems to keep them safe in that world. Madison's case is one of thousands. Every year, hundreds of teenagers are victimized by online predators. Most survive but are traumatized. Some, like Madison, don't survive at all, until there are fundamental changes in how social media platforms operate, in how parents approach digital parenting, in how teenagers are educated about online dangers. More families will experience what the Parkers experienced. If you're a parent, take online safety seriously. Monitor your teenagers' accounts. Talk openly about dangers. Trust your instincts. If you're a teenager, recognize that people online can be predators even when they seem not. Never meet someone from online without telling trusted adults. Trust your instincts about uncomfortable situations. If you work in social media or technology, prioritize safety over growth. Young people's lives are more important than engagement metrics. Madison Parker was 16 years old when she met someone from Instagram at a Starbucks on a Saturday afternoon. She thought she was meeting a cute 18-year-old boy who understood her. She was actually meeting a 40-year-old predator who'd spent weeks grooming her for exactly this moment. She got into his car willingly, excited for what she thought would be a fun afternoon. Instead, she died, and her family spent 5 years searching for her before her body was finally found in the woods. Her story is a tragedy, but it's also one that every parent and every teenager needs to hear and take seriously, because the next Madison Parker might be your daughter, your sister, your friend. And the next David Harrington is out there right now, creating fake accounts, grooming vulnerable teenagers, waiting for someone to say yes to meeting up. This story is every mother's nightmare, and every teenage girl's reality. Madison Parker wasn't doing anything unusual on October 14, 2017. She was doing what millions of teenagers do. Talking to someone online who made her feel special, excited about meeting them in person, convinced she was mature enough to handle it. Her mother wasn't doing anything wrong either. Sarah was trying to balance giving Madison age-appropriate independence with keeping her safe. She trusted her 16-year-old daughter to go to the mall with friends. That trust wasn't misplaced. Madison had earned it through years of being responsible. What happened to Madison wasn't Sarah's fault for trusting. It wasn't Madison's fault for wanting to feel special. It was entirely David Harrington's fault for being a predator who spent years perfecting techniques to manipulate teenagers. But knowing where to place blame doesn't prevent the next Madison from meeting the next Harrington. The uncomfortable truth is that every teenage girl reading this probably knows someone who's met a person from online. Maybe you've done it yourself. Maybe it turned out fine. The person was who they claimed to be. The meeting was innocent. Nothing bad happened. That's how predators succeed. Most online interactions are fine. Most people aren't David Harrington. So teenagers think, it won't happen to me, because statistically, it probably won't. Until it does. Madison thought she was meeting an 18-year-old boy who liked the same music she did. She walked into that Starbucks excited and happy. The security footage shows her smiling. She had no idea she was walking into her own murder. If you're a teenage girl reading this, please understand that you cannot tell who's safe and who's dangerous based on messages and photos. People lie. Photos are stolen. Predators are sophisticated. You think you're smart enough to recognize danger, but Madison was smart too. If someone online asks you to meet them in person, tell a parent or trusted adult. If someone asks you to keep your relationship secret, that's a red flag. If someone makes you feel extremely special very quickly, be suspicious rather than flattered. If something feels even slightly wrong, trust that instinct. Your parents aren't trying to control you or ruin your fun by being concerned about who you talk to online. They're trying to prevent what happened to Madison from happening to you. They're not overreacting. Madison's parents have spent 8 years wishing they'd been more protective, wishing they'd monitored more carefully, wishing they'd said no. Sarah Parker would trade anything to go back to October 14, 2017, and tell Madison no when she asked to go to the mall. David would trade anything to have installed monitoring software on Madison's phone. The twins would trade anything to have their sister back. But they can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is learn from Madison's story and make different choices. If you're a parent reading this, talk to your teenagers about online safety. Not in a scary lecture way, but in an honest conversation about real dangers. Monitor their social media. Know who they're talking to. Create an environment where they feel safe telling you when something feels wrong. You can't protect your children from everything, but you can reduce their risk. You can create obstacles that make it harder for predators to access them. You can teach them to recognize manipulation. You can be present and aware. Madison Parker was 16 years old, blonde, pretty, smart, from a good family. She had her whole life ahead of her. College, career, relationships, maybe someday children of her own. David Harrington took all of that away in one afternoon because she trusted someone she shouldn't have. Don't let Madison's story repeat itself with you or someone you love. Learn from it. Be cautious. Protect yourself and each other. Because somewhere right now, another David Harrington is creating a fake account, choosing profile pictures, thinking about which teenage girl to target next. And somewhere right now, another Madison is messaging with someone who seems nice, who makes her feel special, who she's thinking about meeting. The difference between that girl becoming another tragedy or staying safe might be whether she remembers Madison's story, whether she tells someone before she goes to meet a stranger, whether her parents are monitoring closely enough to notice the warning signs. Madison can't warn her. Madison died in 2017, but her story can warn her. Your awareness can save her. Remember Madison Parker. Remember that pretty blonde girl in the Starbucks security footage, smiling as she walks out with someone who would kill her minutes later. Remember that she thought she was safe. Remember that she was wrong, and make different choices than she made. Not because she was stupid or bad, she wasn't, but because predators exist, and protecting yourself from them requires more caution than teenage optimism wants to believe is necessary. Madison's light was extinguished at 16. Don't let yours be